I pulled into the empty parking lot of Sunny Valley gas station just as the sun was going down. The place sat alone on the highway outside Cedar Falls, Iowa, my new home of exactly 2 weeks. The now hiring sign that had been taped to the door last week was gone, replaced by nothing. That was a good sign, I hoped. The job was mine. My car shuddered as I turned off the engine. The poor thing barely survived the drive from Chicago to this small town. I checked my watch, 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes early for my first night shift. I really needed this job. Moving to Cedar Falls hadn't been my first choice, or any choice really. After losing my apartment and most of my savings in Chicago, my only option was to crash with my cousin until I got back on my feet. A night shift at a gas station wasn't glamorous, but it paid, and that's all that mattered right now. The front door jingled as I walked in. The inside looked like any other gas station. Rows of snacks, coolers along the back wall, a counter with cigarettes behind it, and that distinct smell of coffee mixed with cleaning products. "Hello?" I called out. A shuffling sound came from behind the counter, and a middle-aged man popped up like he'd been looking for something on the floor. "You must be Michael," he said, brushing his hands on his uniform shirt. "Right on time. I'm Jerry." I walked over and shook his hand. His palm felt clammy, and he had dark circles under his eyes. Working nights will do that to you, I figured. "Thanks for giving me the job," I said. "I appreciate it." Jerry nodded, glancing toward the windows. "Let's get started on your training. I want to finish before it gets completely dark." For the next hour, Jerry showed me the basics. How to use the register, where the stock was kept, how to check in deliveries, and the closing procedures. All standard stuff. He was thorough but rushed, constantly checking his watch or looking out the windows as it got dark outside. "The place is pretty slow at night," Jerry explained as he showed me how to count the till. "Mostly truckers and the occasional local who needs something after the grocery stores close." I nodded, trying to remember everything he was telling me. The job seemed straightforward enough. "That covers most of the normal stuff," Jerry said, closing the register drawer. Then he paused, his expression changing. "But there's something else you need to know." He reached under the counter and pulled out an old leather notebook. The corners were frayed and the leather was cracked. "The rules," Jerry said, holding it like it was something precious and dangerous at the same time. "Rules?" I asked. "Rules for the night shift," he clarified, placing the notebook on the counter between us. "These are important, Michael. Very important." I opened the notebook, expecting to find standard company policies. Instead, I found a handwritten list that made no sense. 1. Don't let the man with the light bulb head stay too long. 9 minutes maximum. 2. Allow the woman in the red coat to buy a single beer. Do not comment on her appearance or behavior. 3. Hide from the tall man with the wide-brimmed hat. Do not let him see you. 4. Never go outside between 2 to 3 a.m. for any reason. I looked up at Jerry, waiting for him to laugh and tell me it was some kind of initiation prank, but his face remained totally serious. "What is this?" I asked, tapping the notebook. Jerry ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, I know how it sounds, but these rules aren't a joke. They keep you safe." "Safe from what? People with weird headwear?" I tried to smile, but Jerry's expression killed my attempt at humor. "Craig Patterson didn't think the rules were serious either," Jerry said quietly. "Who's Craig?" "The guy who had this job before you." Jerry looked down at his hands. "He broke Rule 3. The tall man, he saw Craig." A chill ran through me, not because I believed him, but because of how convinced Jerry seemed. "What happened to him?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Jerry looked up, his eyes locking with mine. "I found what was left of him behind the dumpsters. The police never figured out what animal could have done that to a person." My stomach tightened. Either this was the most elaborate prank I'd ever experienced, or Jerry actually believed what he was saying. "So you're telling me these customers are dangerous?" I'm telling you that the rules keep bad things from happening, Jerry said. Just follow them exactly as written. I looked through the rest of the notebook. There were no explanations, no details about why these rules existed or what would happen if they were broken, apart from what supposedly happened to Craig. The light bulb head guy, what does that even mean? I asked. You'll know him when you see him, Jerry said, checking his watch again. Trust me. Just remember, 9 minutes. That's all he gets. After that, just tell him he needs to leave. He always listens. This was getting weirder by the second. And the woman in the red coat? She'll buy a beer, just one. Ring her up, take her money, and say nothing else to her. Jerry's voice had taken on an almost chanting quality, like he'd said these words many times before. The tall man? If you hear the door chime and see a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat, hide. Immediately. Don't let him see you. There's a space under the counter that's perfect. I closed the notebook. And I can't go outside between 2 and 3 a.m. because... Jerry shook his head. Just don't. Not for anyone or anything. Not if you hear screaming. Not if the building catches fire. Not if the president himself shows up. You stay inside during that hour. The conviction in his voice made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Part of me wanted to hand back the notebook and walk out, but I needed this job, and if playing along with Jerry's delusions was part of it, I could manage that. I should get going, Jerry said, gathering his things. The night shift is all yours now. Remember the rules, Michael. Your life depends on it. He went toward the door, then turned back. One more thing. Keep that notebook with you at all times. Don't leave it where customers can see it. Then he was gone, the door jingling behind him, leaving me alone in the brightly lit gas station with a notebook full of bizarre instructions. I sat on the stool behind the counter, flipping through the notebook again. Was this some kind of psychological test? Or maybe Jerry was messing with the new guy? But that story about Craig felt too specific, too grim to be made up on the spot. I set the notebook aside and tidied up the counter area. The rational part of my brain said this was all nonsense. People don't have light bulbs for heads. The tall man and the woman in the red coat were probably regular customers that Jerry had built into bogeymen to make the night shift less boring. Yet I couldn't shake the genuine fear I'd seen in Jerry's eyes. He believed these rules mattered. He believed breaking them got Craig killed. I picked up the notebook again. Maybe it was better to be safe than sorry. I tucked it into my pocket, where I could easily reach it. The clock on the wall read 9:17 p.m. The night stretched ahead of me, long and suddenly full of uncertainty. I leaned back on the stool, torn between dismissing Jerry's rules as complete nonsense and the nagging worry that there might be something to them after all. The clock on the wall behind the counter read 12:23 a.m. 3 hours into my first night shift, and boredom had fully set in. I'd organized the candy display twice, checked the coolers to make sure everything was fully stocked, and even swept behind the counter. Anything to keep my mind off Jerry's weird notebook of rules. I kept it in my pocket, though, not because I believed in glowing-headed customers or the mysterious woman in a red coat, but because Jerry seemed so dead serious about it, and on the off chance this wasn't some elaborate prank, I didn't want to end up like Craig Patterson. The gas station remained quiet. Outside, a single streetlight lit up the empty parking lot. An occasional car sped past on the highway, headlights briefly showing through the darkness before disappearing. None stopped. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through job listings in Cedar Falls. Maybe I could find something less creepy for tomorrow, but the pay here was decent, and night shifts meant fewer customers to deal with. Plus, I needed the money. My bank account couldn't handle another week of unemployment. The door chimed. I looked up, ready to greet my first customer of the night, and the words died in my throat. A man stood just inside the entrance. He was average height, wearing ordinary jeans and a dark jacket, But his head wasn't right. It was oversized, round, and gave off a steady yellow-white glow. The light pulsed slightly, like a bulb with a bad connection. Rule number 1 from Jerry's notebook flashed in my mind. Don't let the man with the light bulb head stay too long. 9 minutes maximum. I blinked hard. This couldn't be real. Maybe lack of sleep was making me hallucinate. But when I opened my eyes, light bulb head was still there, moving slowly through the chip aisle. He didn't grab anything, just walked along, looking at the shelves with a head that literally glowed like a lamp. I checked the time. 12:24 a.m., 9 minutes, Jerry had said. I started counting. Light bulb head moved to the candy section next. His movements were oddly calm and purposeful, like he was following a set path through the store. No other features were visible. The glow was too bright to make out any actual face. Was there a face under there? Or just more light? I wanted to laugh at how crazy this was. Maybe Jerry was playing an elaborate joke. Maybe this was a guy with some kind of costume or prop. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. The way the light bounced off surfaces looked too real, too physical. The minutes dragged by. Lightbulb head moved to check out the magazines, then the small automotive section, then back to the snacks. He never picked anything up, never acknowledged my presence, just browsed. At 12:32, I checked my phone again. 8 minutes had passed. 1 more minute, I whispered to myself. Lightbulb head was now by the coffee station, his glow making the metal containers look almost bronze in the weird light. 9 minutes were almost up, and according to Jerry's rules, I needed to make him leave. What would happen if I didn't? Would Jerry know? Would something bad happen? This was ridiculous, getting worked up over some guy with a weird head, but Jerry's fear when he told me the rules hadn't seemed fake. The clock hit 12:33 a.m. I took a deep breath and walked out from behind the counter. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "I think you need to leave now." Lightbulb head turned toward me. The movement was smooth, not threatening. For a few seconds, he just stood there. Then, without any resistance or acknowledgement, he turned and walked to the door. The chime sounded as he left, and I watched through the windows as his glowing figure crossed the parking lot and simply disappeared at the edge of the property. Not got into a car, not walked into the trees, just disappeared. I went back behind the counter, my legs feeling weirdly unsteady. I took out Jerry's notebook and looked at the first rule. 9 minutes maximum. Exactly 9 minutes. What the hell is going on here? I said out loud, needing to hear a normal human voice, even if it was just my own. I tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. Maybe it was a guy with a fancy costume. Maybe this whole thing was some weird local tradition where people messed with the new night shift worker. But none of those ideas felt right. For the next 20 minutes, no customers came in. I tried to distract myself by checking my phone, but I kept looking up at the door, expecting to see that weird glow return. At 12:57 a.m., the door chimed again. A woman walked in wearing a red coat. She was average height with brown hair, and she went straight for the beer cooler at the back of the store. Rule number 2, allow the woman in the red coat to buy a single beer. Do not comment on her appearance or behavior. This couldn't be a coincidence. 2 of Jerry's weird rules coming true in one night. The woman picked a single bottle of beer and came to the counter. Her eyes never met mine, looking at some point near the floor. She set the beer down and pulled out a credit card. When she handed it to me, I saw the name, Emma. I rang up the beer without saying anything, following Rule 2 exactly. My hand touched hers as I gave back the credit card, and I noticed how cold her skin felt. Not just cool from the outside air, but ice cold. Emma took her beer and left without a word or glance. No thank you or good night. Nothing. I watched her through the windows as she walked to the edge of the parking lot, then turned and went along the highway. No car. Where was she going? The nearest houses were miles away. After Emma went out of sight, I pulled out Jerry's notebook again. 2 for 2 on the weird rules, which meant I checked the time. 1:10 a.m. Rule 3. Hide from the tall man with the wide-brimmed hat. Do not let him see you. According to Jerry, the tall man had killed Craig Patterson, or what was left of him had been found behind the dumpsters. Jerry had made that part very clear. I looked at the space under the counter where Jerry had shown me I could hide. It was cramped, but big enough for someone to squeeze into if they needed to. Part of me wanted to dismiss all this as nonsense, but after Lightbulb Head and Emma in her red coat, I couldn't ignore the pattern. These rules matched real people, or whatever these visitors were. The minutes ticked by. 1:20 a.m., 1:35 a.m. The store remained empty. I tried passing time by checking stock in the back room, but I kept coming back to the counter, watching the clock and the front door. 1:45 a.m. The door chimed. A tall figure stepped inside wearing a wide-brimmed hat that hid his face in shadow. He wore a long coat despite the warm summer night, his hands tucked into deep pockets. Rule 3 screamed in my head. Hide! Don't let him see you! But I didn't move. I stood frozen behind the counter, watching as the tall man noticed me and slowly began walking forward. Each step he took was careful, steady. He moved directly toward the counter where I stood, frozen with fear. This was the man Jerry said had killed Craig. I should be hiding right now. I should be under the counter. But my body wouldn't respond. The tall man stopped in front of the counter. Up close, I could see his hands. Normal human hands, rough but ordinary. He reached up toward his hat. I backed up against the cigarette display, nearly knocking several packs to the floor. The tall man lifted his hat, showing his face. I had to stop myself from gasping. His face was badly scarred. Scar tissue pulled his features into a twisted smile on one side. One eye sat lower than the other, and patches of skin had a strange texture, like wax that had melted and hardened again. But his eyes were alert, smart, and very human. He reached into his coat pocket. I tensed, expecting a weapon, but instead he pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the counter and slid it toward me. I hesitated, then picked it up and unfolded it. In messy handwriting, it read, "He's lying. Jerry is not who you think he is. Be careful." I looked up, questions forming, but the tall man put his finger to his lips, telling me to be quiet. Then he put his hat back on, gave me a slight nod, and turned away. I watched him walk to the door, his tall frame moving with the same steady pace. The door chimed as he left, and like the others, he walked to the edge of the parking lot before vanishing into the darkness. I looked down at the note again, reading the 11 words over and over. He's lying. Jerry is not who you think he is. Be careful. The clock on the wall read 1:55 a.m. 5 minutes until 2 a.m. Rule 4. Never go outside between 2 and 3 a.m. for any reason. I folded the note and put it in my pocket next to Jerry's notebook. 3 of the 4 rules had happened exactly as written. But now I had to wonder, were these rules actually protecting me, or were they serving some other purpose? Jerry had seemed really worried about my safety, but the tall man's warning suggested something else entirely. As the minute hand moved toward 2 a.m., I started questioning everything Jerry had told me. If he'd lied about the tall man, what else had he lied about? Was Craig Patterson really dead? Or was that story just meant to scare me into following rules that served Jerry's hidden agenda? The clock ticked closer to 2 a.m., and I looked out at the empty parking lot, wondering what would happen if I stepped outside during the forbidden hour. What was I being protected from? Or what was being protected from me? The rest of the night dragged on after my encounter with the tall man. I kept glancing at the clock as 2 a.m. arrived, but in the end I stayed inside. Something about the tall man's warning made me hesitate to test Jerry's fourth rule, at least not without more information. Instead, I spent the remaining hours watching the door and jumping at every sound. The gas station remained dead quiet. No more customers with light bulb heads, women in red coats, or tall men with warnings. Just me, the noisy fluorescent lights, and too many questions. By the time dawn broke, my eyes were very dry from lack of sleep. The morning light coming through the windows should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Night might be over, but I still couldn't shake the weird events. At 6:58 a.m., a sedan pulled into the parking lot. Jerry climbed out, looking as tired as I felt. He straightened his uniform shirt before walking toward the entrance. The morning shift change had arrived. The door chimed as he walked in. "Morning," he said, avoiding eye contact as he made his way behind the counter. "Any problems last night?" I watched him for a moment, trying to read his face. "Actually, yeah, there was something." Jerry's hand paused halfway to the register. "What happened?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the note. "The tall man came in last night." Jerry's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly alert. "You saw him? Did he see you?" "Yeah, we had a conversation. Well, sort of." I held up the folded paper. "He gave me this." Jerry's face went pale. His mouth opened and closed twice before he managed to speak. "You talked to him? You actually talked to him?" He didn't say anything, just handed me this note. I unfolded it and placed it on the counter between us. Jerry snatched it up. As he read it, his face went pale. He crumpled the note. "You can't trust him," Jerry said, his voice shaking. "Thomas Wright is manipulating you." "Thomas Wright?" I kept my voice even. "You never mentioned his name before." Jerry looked like he'd been caught in a lie. He shoved the crumpled note into his pocket. "Thomas worked here years ago," Jerry said after a pause. "He's the one who killed Craig. I told you about finding what was left of Craig behind the dumpsters? That was Thomas's doing." There was something forced about Jerry's reaction, like he was improvising a story on the spot. "He wants you to distrust me," Jerry continued, his words coming faster now. "So you'll break the rules. That's how he gets to you." "Why would he want to get to me?" Jerry ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, there are things about this place I can't explain. That's why the rules exist. They keep you safe." He glanced at his watch. "You should go home and get some sleep. I'll see you tonight." The dismissal was obvious. I grabbed my jacket and went for the door, turning back one last time. Why does he look like that? His face? Jerry's expression hardened. "Because he tried to break the rules. That's what happens." His tone became almost threatening. "Remember that, Michael." I nodded and left, the door chiming behind me. The drive back to my cousin's apartment took 15 minutes. Jerry knew the tall man's name. He'd called him Thomas Wright without hesitation, yet he'd never mentioned that detail before. And why would Thomas kill Craig? What would be his motive? My cousin had already left for work when I got back to the apartment. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, too wired to sleep. The confrontation with Jerry played over and over in my mind. I kept seeing his face when I showed him the note. Shocked, angry, and worst of all, afraid. After 2 cups of coffee, I opened my laptop. If Thomas Wright had worked at the gas station years ago, maybe there was some record online. I typed Thomas Wright Cedar Falls into the search bar. Nothing relevant came up. I tried Thomas Wright Sunny Valley gas station. Still nothing. Missing person Cedar Falls, I typed next. This search brought back several results. I clicked on the first one, a news article from 3 years ago about a college student who disappeared after a party. No connection to the gas station. The second was about an elderly man with dementia who wandered away from his home and was found 2 days later. The third article made me sit up straight. Local man missing. Police seek information. The story was from 2018, about Ethan Winters, 24. who disappeared after his night shift at a gas station on Highway 27, the Sunny Valley gas station. The police had found his car in the parking lot, but no sign of Ethan. The article mentioned there was no evidence of foul play and the case remained open. I kept digging. Over the next hour, I found 2 more cases. Ryan Murphy in 2016 and Daniel Cooper in 2013. Both had worked night shifts at the Sunny Valley gas station. Both had disappeared without a trace. Then I found the article that made me freeze. From 2015, headlined "Local Business Owner Missing." Robert Garcia, 52, owner of Sunny Valley gas station, had disappeared shortly after hiring a new night clerk. The police statement mentioned that Mr. Garcia was last seen at the gas station on a Friday evening. When his daughter came to check on him the following Monday, the station was being operated by a new manager who claimed Garcia had hired him and then left town for personal reasons. The description of the new manager matched Jerry. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. This couldn't be a coincidence. Multiple people connected to that gas station had vanished over the years. And based on the timeline in the articles, Jerry had appeared right around the time the owner disappeared. Sleep was impossible now. I paced around the apartment, trying to make sense of everything. Jerry's rules, the strange customers, Thomas Wright's warning, and now a pattern of disappearances all centered on that gas station on Highway 27. By the time evening came, I'd made a decision. I needed to find hard evidence. If Jerry was involved in these disappearances, there might be something at the gas station. Something linking him to Craig or the others. I arrived 30 minutes before my shift was scheduled to start. The parking lot was empty. Jerry's car wasn't there yet. I used my key to let myself in. The store was quiet, the only sound coming from the buzzing coolers along the back wall. I headed straight for the small office behind the counter. I'd only been in there once during my training when Jerry showed me where the safe was kept. The room was tiny, with barely enough space for a desk, filing cabinet, and small safe bolted to the floor. I started with the desk drawers. Nothing unusual, just paperwork, receipts, and office supplies. The filing cabinet contained employee records, but I found nothing for Thomas Wright or Craig Patterson. In fact, there were only 2 employee files. Mine and Jerry's. My eyes moved to the air vent near the ceiling. It looked slightly crooked, the screws not fully tightened. I grabbed the desk chair and positioned it under the vent. Standing on it, I removed the loose screws and pulled the vent cover off. Inside was a plastic bag. I pulled it out. Inside the bag were a wallet and a phone. The wallet contained a driver's license for Craig Patterson, along with $37 and a few credit cards. The phone was older, its screen cracked on one side. I pressed the power button, not expecting it to work after sitting in a vent for who knows how long. To my surprise, it lit up. The battery was at 12%. Just enough juice to check it. The phone was locked, but the notifications were visible on the screen. Dozens of text messages, all from the same contact. Jerry. I swiped up to see the preview of the most recent one. Craig, where are you? You missed your shift again. Call me ASAP. The timestamp showed it was sent 3 days after Jerry claimed Craig had been killed. My hands shook as I put everything back in the bag and returned it to my pocket. I replaced the vent cover, tightened the screws, and moved the chair back to its original position. Just as I was closing the office door, I heard a car pull into the parking lot. I quickly moved behind the counter, pretending to check the register as Jerry walked in. "You're early," he said, eyeing me carefully. "Yeah, couldn't sleep well," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thought I might as well come in and get set up." Jerry nodded, but something in his expression had changed. He watched me with unusual intensity, like he was trying to read my thoughts. "Did you get any rest after your shift?" he asked, setting his bag down. "A little. First night was just a lot to take in." Jerry moved around the store, checking stock levels and straightening items on shelves. Every few minutes I caught him glancing in my direction. "I was thinking about what you said this morning. I said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. About Thomas Wright. Jerry stopped what he was doing. What about him? You said he used to work here. What happened to him exactly? Jerry's eyes narrowed. He tried to break the rules. That's all you need to know. Which rule? Rule 4. Jerry's voice dropped. He went outside during the forbidden hour. Whatever's out there and got to him. Changed him. That's why his face is like that now. I nodded as if accepting his explanation. And Craig, you're sure it was Thomas who... I found what was left of him. Jerry's tone grew harsh. Don't let Wright fool you, Michael. He's dangerous. If you see him again, follow Rule 3. Hide. We went through the closing procedures in tense silence. As Jerry prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Speaking of the rules, he said, checking his watch. Remember Rule 4 tonight. It's particularly important. Don't go outside between 2 and 3 a.m., I recited. For any reason. Exactly. Jerry studied my face for a moment longer. I'll see you in the morning. After he left, I pulled out Craig's phone again. The battery was now at 8%. I scrolled through the notification screen, reading the previews of text messages Jerry had sent after Craig supposedly died. Craig, this is the 3rd shift you've missed. If you don't show up tonight, don't bother coming back. This is your final warning. Why would Jerry send these messages if he'd found Craig's remains behind the dumpsters? Unless Craig hadn't died at all. Unless Jerry was lying. I put the phone away and checked the time. 9:42 p.m. Hours to go before 2 a.m. Lightbulb head came in at his usual time, stayed his 9 minutes, and left when asked. Emma in her red coat bought her single beer without making eye contact. The night followed the pattern Jerry had described. Except this time, I knew what I was going to do. When 2 a.m. rolled around, I wasn't going to stay inside like Jerry insisted. I was going to break Rule 4. Whatever was outside, or whatever wasn't outside, I needed to know the truth. And if Jerry had lied about Craig, about Thomas, about everything else, then he was probably lying about this too. The clock ticked closer to 2 a.m. I watched the second hand move, feeling scared but determined. If I stepped outside during the forbidden hour, I might finally understand what was happening at this gas station. Or I might end up like the others who had disappeared without a trace. At exactly 2 a.m., I pushed open the gas station door and stepped outside. The parking lot looked normal, bathed in the harsh glow of the overhead fluorescent lights. A moth fluttered around one of the fixtures, casting a tiny dancing shadow on the cracked asphalt below. I stood there for a moment, breathing faster than normal. The warm night air felt thick in my lungs. Part of me had expected something to happen immediately. Maybe the sky to split open or some monster to appear. But there was nothing. Just the faint noise of occasional traffic on the highway and the buzz of insects in the grass beyond the lot. Jerry's warning kept playing in my mind. Never go outside between 2-3 a.m. for any reason. Yet here I was, breaking rule number 4, and the world hadn't ended. The revelation felt both anticlimactic and satisfying. Another of Jerry's lies exposed. I walked slowly across the parking lot, looking around for anything weird. My footsteps sounded too loud in the quiet. I pulled out Craig's phone from my pocket and checked the time. 2:04 a.m. Still nothing strange. Near the edge of the property, I turned back to look at the gas station. From this angle, the bright lights inside made the windows shine in the darkness. I thought about the other employees who had worked here before me. Ryan Murphy, Daniel Cooper, and who knew how many others. Had they also stood out here in the dark, breaking Jerry's rules, trying to understand what was happening? I walked around the whole lot, staying alert for anything strange. The dumpsters sat at the far corner of the property, partially hidden from the main building by a small maintenance shed. This would be where Jerry claimed to have found Craig's remains. I walked up slowly, not entirely sure what I was looking for. Evidence of a struggle? Bloodstains? Some sign that Craig had actually died here? The area around the dumpsters looked clean. Too clean, actually. No scattered trash, no stains on the concrete pad beneath them. If something violent had happened here, someone had gone to great lengths to remove all traces of it. I checked the time again. 2:17 a.m. I'd been outside for 17 minutes and nothing had happened. No mysterious entities, no supernatural events. Just a quiet night at a gas station with too many secrets. A car passed on the highway, its headlights briefly lighting up the trees at the edge of the property before disappearing around the bend. I sighed, starting to feel foolish. Maybe there was nothing to rule number 4. Maybe it was just another way for Jerry to control his employees. I turned to head back to the store when something caught my eye. The air near the dumpsters started to look weird, wavy, and distorted. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The distortion got worse. The space between the dumpsters and the maintenance shed began to bend and fold in a way that didn't seem possible. I backed up a step, suddenly unsure if breaking Rule 4 had been a good idea after all. From within the warped space, someone appeared. Tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Thomas Wright stepped through what looked like a hole in the air. The opening closed behind him, the air rippling before going back to normal. "You're finally ready to listen," he said, his voice rough but steady. I stood frozen, unable to process what I'd just witnessed. Thomas adjusted his hat, keeping the shadows across his disfigured face. "How did you—" I started. "The same way Jerry comes and goes," Thomas interrupted. "This place isn't what you think it is." I gestured to where he'd appeared. What was that? Some kind of portal? "A weak point," Thomas explained. "There are places where the barriers between dimensions thin out. This gas station sits on one of those points." My mind raced to make sense of his words. Like in sci-fi movies? Parallel universes? Thomas made a sound that might have been a laugh. Something like that, but much worse than fiction could imagine. He nodded toward the gas station. "And Jerry, he's not human. Never was." I felt a chill run through me, even though it was a warm night. What is he then? An entity that feeds on human life force, our years, our experiences. He consumes time. Thomas touched his scarred face. I got too close to understanding what he was. This was the result. I thought about the strange customers, Lightbulb Head and the woman in the red coat. And the rules? The people Jerry told me to watch out for. "The rules aren't protecting you," Thomas said, his voice growing bitter. "They're ensuring Jerry's feeding ritual remains uninterrupted. Lightbulb Head isn't a threat. He's a warning signal. When dimensions start to overlap, he appears. 9 minutes is how long the warning lasts before Jerry can sense it." That explained why nothing had attacked Lightbulb Head when his time was up. He simply left because his purpose was fulfilled. "And the woman in the red coat, Emma?" I asked. Thomas's expression softened slightly. "Another victim, trapped in a loop. Buying that beer is the only way she can interact with this world now. Jerry lets her have this small freedom. Maybe as a cruel joke, or maybe he needs her to keep things in check. I'm not sure." "And you? Jerry said you killed Craig." Thomas shook his head. "Jerry says that about all his victims, blames the last employee who escaped. Before me, he blamed someone else. I pulled Craig's phone from my pocket. I found this hidden in the office. Jerry sent texts to Craig days after he claimed Craig was dead." Thomas nodded. "Jerry leaves false trails, makes it look like people just walked away from their lives. He's had decades to perfect his methods." Decades. The gas station didn't look that old. "Come with me," Thomas said, moving toward the back of the dumpsters. "I need to show you something." He took me to a spot behind the dumpsters where the concrete stuck out a few feet. It looked normal, but Thomas got down and put his hand on the ground. I was shocked when a line showed up in the concrete showing a hidden door. "Jerry's not careful enough with his collection," Thomas said, lifting the hidden door to reveal a set of narrow stairs descending into darkness. I discovered this years ago when I worked here. I paused, but only for a moment. I'd come too far to back out now. Thomas pulled a small flashlight from his coat pocket and handed it to me. "After you," he said. The stairs led down into a cellar that shouldn't exist. The space was small, maybe 15 feet square, with a low ceiling that made Thomas hunch over. My flashlight showed shelves along the walls, filled with personal items, watches, wallets, cell phones, car keys. The far wall had dozens of employee name tags, all lined up in neat rows. "My God," I whispered, moving closer to examine them. The oldest tags were yellowed with age, going back to the 1970s. Yet the gas station had only been built in 2010, according to the permits I'd looked up online. "Jerry has been here much longer than the building," Thomas explained, following my thoughts. "The gas station changes, gets rebuilt. But the weak point remains, and so does he." Among the name tags, I spotted a blood-stained uniform shirt with Craig embroidered on the pocket. I reached out to touch it, but stopped myself. "How many people?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I've counted 53 name tags," Thomas replied. "But there could be more." I shined the flashlight across the collection of personal stuff. Wallets that would have contained ID cards and family photos. Phones that would have received worried texts from friends wondering where they'd gone. Lives interrupted and then erased. "The missing persons reports only go back a few years," I said. "If Jerry's been doing this for decades, why aren't there more reports, more investigations?" "Because Jerry doesn't just kill, he erases people from reality, absorbing their years," Thomas said. "The longer he feeds, the more complete the erasure. Craig is still remembered because he was recent, but the others." He gestured to the oldest name tags. "No one remembers them anymore. Their families have forgotten they existed." A sick feeling hit my stomach as I realized he was right. When I'd asked around town about previous gas station employees, most people couldn't remember anyone specific. The older cases had no online records, no newspaper stories, nothing except these keepsakes in Jerry's hidden collection. "Why keep these things?" I asked. "If he wants to erase them, why hold on to their belongings?" "Trophies, maybe," Thomas suggested. "Or maybe he needs them to maintain the erasure. I don't understand all of his methods." I walked along the shelves, looking at the stuff there. Some things looked really old, others seemed newer. My flashlight lit up a set of keys with a Cedar Falls Community College keychain, probably from one of the missing students I'd read about. "How did you escape?" I asked Thomas. He touched his scarred face again. "I learned what he was and tried to fight back. I knew enough about the weak points to slip through during the forbidden hour, but not enough to protect myself from the damage it caused. I've been trying to warn his victims ever since, but Jerry's rules make it difficult. If employees follow them perfectly, I can't make contact. So the rules are real. They're just not meant to protect us." Thomas nodded. "Rule 3 keeps you from meeting me. Rule 4 keeps you from discovering this place. Rule 1 ensures you send away the warning before Jerry notices. And Rule 2... He stopped talking, looking upset. "What about Rule 2? Emma buying the beer." "A cruelty," Thomas said quietly. "A reminder to Jerry of all he's consumed. She was the first, you see. The original owner of this land. Every beer purchased is a token of remembrance, but also reinforces her imprisonment." I thought about Emma's cold hand when she'd handed me her credit card, how she wouldn't look at me. She seemed stuck in a routine, doing the same thing every night. "How do we stop him?" I asked. "Together," Thomas replied. "But not tonight. Jerry will return at dawn, and we need to be prepared. There's a ritual that can send him back and seal the weak point, but it requires items I don't have yet." I nodded, understanding. "What do you need?" "Blood from the victims. There's enough here." He gestured to Craig's uniform. "And something personal from someone who escaped, That would be me. But most importantly, we need someone connected to this reality who understands the truth. That's you, Michael. The way he said it made it sound like I'd been chosen for this, but that couldn't be right. I'd just been desperate enough to take a night shift job with bizarre requirements. "We should leave," Thomas said, glancing at his watch. "You've been out here too long. Jerry might sense something's wrong." We climbed back up the stairs and Thomas sealed the trapdoor behind us. The concrete seemed solid again, with no visible seam or handle. If he hadn't shown me, I would never have known it existed. "Come back tomorrow night," Thomas instructed. "Make Jerry believe you followed all the rules tonight. Don't give him any reason to suspect." "I will," I promised. Then a thought occurred to me. "Wait, do you know Robert Garcia, the owner who disappeared when Jerry showed up?" Thomas made a face. "Another of Jerry's victims. Jerry takes identities sometimes, not just lives. He's probably worn many names over the decades." I thought about Sarah Garcia, still searching for answers about her father. Just one of many who had lost someone to Jerry Foster. "Be careful going back inside," Thomas warned. "Act normal. I'll find you tomorrow." With that, he turned and walked toward the edge of the property where it was really dark. Just before he got to the trees, he stepped to the side and disappeared, leaving me alone in the parking lot. I checked the time, 2:47 a.m. I'd been outside for almost an hour during the forbidden time. Taking a deep breath, I headed back to the gas station, my head spinning from everything I'd learned. The store looked exactly as I'd left it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The coolers made noise along the back wall. It all seemed so normal, yet nothing would ever be normal again. Not now that I knew what was hiding at the Sunny Valley gas station. I went back behind the counter, already planning what I would do when my shift ended. I needed to contact Sarah Garcia again, do more research on the history of this property. And tomorrow night, I would return prepared. Jerry Foster had taken his last victim. I spent the day after my discovery in the gas station cellar preparing for what would come next. Sleep wasn't an option, not with the knowledge that Jerry, or whatever he really was, had been consuming people for decades. I lay in bed for an hour, staring at the ceiling of my cousin's guest room, before giving up and getting to work. First, I called Sarah Garcia. We'd spoken briefly before when I was researching the missing employees, but now I needed more specific information about her father. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. Sarah looked tired when she arrived. She carried a thick folder stuffed with papers, her investigation into her father's disappearance. "I've been looking for my dad for 3 years, she said, spreading photos across the table. "The police gave up after 6 months. Said there wasn't enough evidence of foul play." The photo on top showed Robert Garcia standing proudly in front of the Sunny Valley gas station. He had gray hair at his temples and smile lines around his eyes. He seemed like the type who'd wave to regular customers by name. "Tell me about the new employee your father hired," I said. Sarah pulled out a statement she'd given police. "Dad called me the day before he disappeared. Said he'd hired someone to manage the night shift, a middle-aged guy who seemed experienced. 3 days later, I went to the station and found this new guy running everything. He told me Dad had sold him the business and left town. Was it this man?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture I'd secretly taken of Jerry. Her face got serious. "That's him. Exactly him. And he hasn't aged a day in 3 years." We talked for another hour. Sarah shared everything she knew about her father and the gas station. The property had changed hands multiple times over the decades, with owners frequently disappearing without explanation. The current building was relatively new, but a gas station had stood on that spot since the 1970s. After leaving Sarah, I drove to a hardware store and bought supplies based on Thomas's instructions. Rock salt, iron filings, chalk, and a small pry bar. On my way back, I stopped at a Catholic supply store for holy water, and at an herbalist shop for sage and other protective herbs. By late afternoon, I'd packed everything into a backpack. I tried to rest before my shift, but I couldn't stop thinking about questions. What exactly was Jerry? How had he existed for so long without being caught? And how many people had he erased from reality? I arrived at the gas station 30 minutes early. The parking lot was empty, so I had time to start my plan. I went straight to the storage room at the back of the building and hid my backpack behind some boxes. Then I pulled out a small pouch of salt and tucked it into my pocket. The door chimed as I walked back into the main store. Jerry stood at the counter, checking the register. "You're early," he said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Figured I might as well come in." Jerry nodded, closing the register drawer. "Any problems last night? See any of our special customers?" I took a deep breath. Time to put on a show. "The light bulb guy came in," I said, making my voice shake slightly. "And he stayed too long." Jerry's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly focused on me. "What do you mean, too long?" "I asked him to leave after 9 minutes like you said, but he just stood there staring at me." I ran a hand through my hair, acting distressed. He stayed for nearly 15 minutes before finally walking out. Jerry's face paled. He came around the counter and grabbed my arm. "What happened after that? Did you see anything unusual? Feel anything?" I pulled away from his grip. "No, nothing happened, but I got scared, so I checked the rules again. You never told me what happens if he stays too long." Jerry paced back and forth, looking at his watch, then out the windows. The sun was setting in the parking lot. "I need to check the perimeter," he muttered, heading for the door. "Stay inside. Don't let anyone in until I get back." Perfect. This would give me time to finish setting up. As soon as Jerry was outside, I rushed to the storage room and pulled out my backpack. Thomas had said he would arrive around dusk, finding his way in through one of the weak points. Sure enough, when I opened the storage room door, Thomas was there, coming through what looked like a crack in the air near the back wall. He gave me a serious nod. "You got everything?" he asked. I showed him the supplies I'd bought. "Salt, iron, holy water, chalk, everything you mentioned." "Good." Thomas took the chalk and began drawing symbols on the floor. "We need to work quickly. Did you distract Jerry?" "Told him Lightbulb Head stayed too long last night. He went to check the perimeter." Thomas nodded, continuing his work. "Smart. That would worry him. It means the boundaries are already weakening." I got the stuff I'd grabbed from the cellar the night before. Craig's bloody name tag and a small token with Thomas's initials that he'd left behind years ago. "Will these work for the ritual?" I asked. Thomas examined them. "Yes. The blood of a victim and something personal from someone who escaped. Now we just need..." The storage room door banged open. Jerry stood there, his face twisted with rage. "I knew it," he spat. "You broke Rule 4 last night. You went outside during the forbidden hour." I backed up a step. "Jerry, I can explain." "You can't explain anything," Jerry snarled, moving toward me. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Actually," I said, reaching into my pocket, "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. You're not human. You consume people, erase them from existence." Jerry stopped, his head tilting at an odd angle. "Who told you that? Was it him?" He pointed at Thomas. "The rule breaker? The one I warned you about?" "No," I said. "It was your collection in the cellar that told me. All those name tags, wallets, phones, trophies from the people you've erased." Jerry's face began to change. His mouth stretched wider than humanly possible, his eyes darkening until they were hollow black pits. "You went into my special place," he said, his voice distorting. "Touched my things." He lunged forward, hands changing into claw-like things. I pulled the pouch from my pocket and threw a line of salt between us. Jerry howled as he hit the invisible barrier, jumping back like he'd been burned. The salt line glowed faintly blue where he'd touched it. What happens if Lightbulb Head stays too long? I asked, backing toward Thomas. You never answered my question? Jerry hissed, circling the edge of the salt line like a predator looking for a way in. When he stays, the barriers weaken. The worlds start to bleed together. Letting things cross over, I said. Things like you. Jerry's face did something that looked like a smile but wasn't quite right. I've gone by many different names over the years. Jerry Foster is just the newest one. He pointed at the gas station around us. This place sits right on top of where worlds get thin, founded ages ago, perfect for feeding. And the rules? I asked, buying time as Thomas continued preparing the ritual behind me. They're not for protection, are they? Oh, they protect something, Jerry said, his voice changing pitch erratically. They protect my feeding ritual. Rule 1 ensures the warning signal doesn't alert others to my presence. Rule 3 keeps troublemakers like him, he pointed at Thomas, from interfering. And Rule 4. He laughed, a hollow sound that echoed strangely in the small room. Rule 4 keeps you from discovering what's underneath. The cellar, I said. Your collection. My anchors, Jerry corrected. Each item ties me to this world. Gives me form and substance. The more I collect, the stronger I become. He pressed a clawed hand against the invisible barrier, making the salt line glow brighter. And you, Michael Henderson, will make a fine addition. I looked back at Thomas, who nodded. He'd finished the ritual preparations. Like you added Robert Garcia, I asked. And Craig Patterson? And all the others whose names no one remembers anymore? Jerry's body seemed to flash, stretching taller, limbs growing longer. Time is such a delicious thing to consume. Years of potential, decades of memories, all gone into the void. He pressed harder against the barrier, and I saw the salt line beginning to break. Run, Thomas whispered urgently. To the main floor. We need more space. I didn't need to be told twice. As Jerry broke through the salt line with a triumphant howl, I ran past him and sprinted down the hallway toward the main store, Thomas right behind me. The fluorescent lights began to blink as we ran. The entire building seemed to shake, and the air got thick and hard to breathe. We rushed into the main area of the store. I pulled more salt from my backpack and quickly laid down another line across the doorway, just as Jerry appeared at the end of the hallway, moving with a jerky, inhuman walk. You can't escape, Jerry called, his voice echoing as if coming from multiple directions at once. This is my domain. I control everything here. The lights continued to flash more rapidly, some of them bursting in showers of sparks. The coolers along the back wall began to vibrate, their glass doors rattling in their frames. The ritual, Thomas said, pulling out the items we'd gathered. We need to start now. I nodded, helping him arrange the items in a small circle on the floor. Craig's bloody name tag, Thomas's token, the iron filings, the chalk symbols copied from the ones he'd drawn in the storage room. Jerry reached the salt line at the doorway and stopped, hissing in frustration. His body kept changing, sometimes looking almost human, other times stretching into something impossibly tall and thin, with too many joints and angles that hurt to look at. You think your little ritual will work? Jerry sneered. Others have tried. Their remains are in my collection too. I tried to block out his words, focusing instead on what Thomas told us to do. We needed to say the names of the victims, calling them from Jerry's collection to weaken his hold on this reality. Craig Patterson, Thomas began, his voice steady. Robert Garcia, I added. With each name, Jerry seemed to flinch slightly, his body looking shakier. We continued through the names we knew, the missing employees I'd researched, the owners who had disappeared. You're too late, Jerry said, his voice now a harsh whisper. I've already begun to feed. He pointed behind us. I turned to see the front door of the gas station swing open. A person walked in, a woman in a red coat. Emma, I breathed, recognizing her immediately. For the first time, she looked directly at me. Her eyes were clear and aware, not vacant as they had been during our previous encounters. She walked toward us, stepping carefully over the ritual items on the floor. "I can help you," she said, her voice soft but determined. It was the first time I'd heard her speak. Jerry hissed, pressing against the salt barrier. "No, you can't break your cycle. You're bound to the ritual." Emma turned to face Jerry, her expression hardening. "I've been trapped for decades, forced to play my part in your feeding ritual. Buying that beer night after night, a mockery of remembrance for each new victim." She looked back at me. "I wasn't just a customer. I was trying to warn you. It was the only action his curse allowed me to take." "The first owner," Thomas explained quietly. "The original owner of this land before Jerry came through." Emma nodded. "I discovered what he was, just as you have." She gestured to the ritual circle. "And now I can finally help stop him." The lights blinked more violently, and the glass in the front windows began to vibrate. Outside, the night had grown unnaturally dark, as if all light was being sucked toward the gas station. Emma knelt beside our ritual circle. "Add my name," she said. "Emma Blackwood. It's been so long since anyone has spoken it." I looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragement. "She's right. With her help, we might actually succeed." Jerry howled from the doorway, his body expanding until it filled the entire frame. The salt line was weakening, small gaps appearing where the grains had been scattered. "You'll all join my collection," Jerry threatened, his voice distorting. "I'll feed on your years, erase you from memory, keep only tokens to anchor your energy to my realm." Emma took my hand, her touch no longer cold but warm and human. "We need to hurry," she said. "The boundaries are failing. Soon, more of his kind will come through." I looked from Emma to Thomas, then back to the monster Jerry pushing against our failing barrier. The final showdown was about to begin, and everything depended on us finishing the ritual before the walls between worlds collapsed completely. We burst through the gas station doors into the parking lot at 2:30 a.m., carrying our ritual supplies. The asphalt felt unnaturally warm under my feet in the cool night air. Behind us, the windows of the store pulsed with an eerie light as reality continued to warp inside. "We need more space," Thomas said, his scarred face tense with concentration. "The energies are too volatile to contain indoors." Emma nodded. "Out here, between worlds, we'll have more control over the ritual." Jerry followed us outside, but he didn't look human anymore. His arms and legs had stretched way too long, with joints bending in ways that hurt to look at. His face was all stretched out, with his mouth split open super wide, showing rows of jagged teeth like broken glass. Only his eyes still looked familiar. They were just black holes that seemed to suck in all the light around them. "You think you can stop me?" Jerry's voice came from everywhere at once, echoing across the empty parking lot. "I've existed for centuries, feeding on the forgotten." We spread out, making a triangle around him just like Thomas told us to. I held the iron pipe I'd grabbed from the store's maintenance closet. In my pocket, I had Craig's bloody name tag, our link to Jerry's victims. "Now," Thomas commanded, sprinkling salt in a circle around Jerry. The three of us began to recite the names of those Jerry had eaten over the decades. With each name, Jerry twitched and shrank back, like the words hurt him. "Craig Patterson," I called out. "Robert Garcia," Emma added. "Daniel Cooper," Thomas continued. We worked our way through the list of names we'd memorized from the cellar collection. With each one, Jerry's body became more unstable, his edges getting fuzzy. Brian Murphy, Ethan Winters, James Sullivan. Jerry let out a shriek that shattered the glass of the gas station windows behind us. His body contracted and then expanded, growing taller until he stood high above us. "Enough!" he roared, lashing out with one elongated arm. I ducked as his claws whistled over my head. Thomas kept going with the ritual. His voice stayed steady even with all the danger. "William Foster, 1994. George Kennedy, 1987. Jerry turned toward Thomas, rage twisting his already messed up face. I saw my chance and hit him with the iron pipe as hard as I could, smashing what counted as Jerry's face. The impact sent shockwaves up my arms, but Jerry pulled back with a hiss of pain, black goo dripping from the wound. "You're just food," Jerry spat, his words gurgling through the damage I'd caused. "All of you. Just walking time that I consume." Emma pulled a small pouch from her coat pocket and sprinkled salt, iron filings, and dried herbs in a circle around Jerry. Her lips moved constantly as she recited more names going back decades. Alice Thornton, 1976. David Miller, 1982. The ground beneath Jerry began to tremble. Small cracks appeared in the asphalt, spreading outward from where he stood. Jerry started moving wildly, throwing his arms and legs around everywhere. "Samuel Wilson, 1965, Thomas called out, his voice growing stronger with each name. I dodged another attack from Jerry and continued my part of the ritual, pulling out Craig's name tag and holding it up. "We release you, Craig Patterson. Return to the light." The name tag burst into blue flame in my hand. The fabric burned away to nothing. The cracks in the pavement widened, revealing not dirt or concrete beneath, but a swirling vortex of darkness shot through with flashes of purple light, the air filled with a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. Jerry's body began to break apart, pieces of him dissolving into the air. But he wasn't going quietly. With a final surge of effort, he lunged toward me, claws extended. I tried to back away, but he caught my ankle, his grip cold and burning at the same time. "If I go back, you're coming with me," Jerry snarled, pulling me toward the expanding vortex. I struggled to break free, digging my fingers into the asphalt, but his strength was inhuman. My body slid inch by inch toward the swirling darkness. Thomas looked at me, then at Jerry, and I saw something change in his expression. He pulled a small metal token from his pocket, the same one we'd used in the ritual, and pressed it against his scarred face. "One more name," Thomas said quietly. "Thomas Wright, 1997. Before I could react, Thomas ran at Jerry and tackled him. The hit broke Jerry's grip on my ankle, and I scrambled backward as both Thomas and Jerry wobbled on the edge of the vortex. "Thomas, no!" I reached out, but it was too late. With a grim smile, Thomas wrapped his arms around Jerry's writhing body and let himself fall backward into the swirling darkness. Jerry's shriek of rage cut off suddenly as they disappeared from view. The vortex began to contract almost immediately, the edges pulling inward. Emma rushed to the edge, but grabbed my arm when I tried to follow. "Stop! You can't help him now. We have to get him out!" I struggled against her grip, surprised by her strength. "Thomas knew what he was doing," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "He's wanted this release for decades. The pain of existing between worlds was worse than any death." I watched helplessly as the portal grew smaller, the cracks in the asphalt sealing themselves. The whining sound faded, replaced by the normal ambient noise of a gas station at night. The buzz of the refrigeration units, the distant sound of traffic on the highway. "Is he?" I couldn't finish the question. I couldn't. "Gone," Emma confirmed, but at peace. What happened to Thomas when he escaped the first time left him trapped between realities. This was his way of finally finding rest. I looked at Emma and noticed I could see through her. She was fading, becoming transparent around the edges. Her red coat was losing its color, changing from bright red to pale pink. Then to nothing. "You're disappearing," I said, reaching out to her but finding my hand passed right through her arm. Emma looked down at herself with a mix of wonder and sadness. "Jerry's curse is broken. I'm free." She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, the expression reached her eyes. "After 70 years of buying that beer every night, I can finally move on." "Where will you go?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted, "but anywhere is better than being trapped in that loop." Her form grew fainter, but before she vanished completely, she gripped my shoulder. her touch now warm and light as a breeze. "Be careful, Michael," she warned. "Weak points between worlds exist everywhere. Gas stations, motels, abandoned buildings, places that sit on the edges of human consciousness. They're often guarded by rules that seem nonsensical but hold dark purposes. If you ever see a list of strange rules again, I'll run the other way," I promised. Emma smiled one last time, then disappeared, leaving me alone in the gas station parking lot. I stood there for a long time, looking at the spot where the vortex had been. The asphalt looked normal now, without even a crack to show what had happened. The gas station behind me had stopped glowing, with only the broken windows showing our fight. By morning, even those didn't seem as bad. The sunrise made the broken glass look like regular vandalism, something that would be fixed with a phone call, written off as kids causing trouble. I went back inside and wrote a quit note, leaving it on the counter with my name tag. There was no way to explain what had happened, and I didn't want to be there when the morning shift showed up and saw the damage. As I walked to my car, I looked back at the Sunny Valley gas station. It looked normal in the early morning light. No one driving by would ever guess what had happened there or how many people it had taken over the years. 3 months later, I was still living with my cousin in Cedar Falls, though I'd found a better job and was saving for my own place. The gas station stuff felt like a bad dream that got hazier each day. I was walking downtown when I saw a new business had opened. Midnight Mario's Pizza. The logo showed a cartoon Italian chef with a super wide smile. Something about it made me stop and look closer. That's when I saw the small sign posted near the entrance. Rules for customers after midnight. The list had 5 items, each more bizarre than the last. 1. Do not order the special unless you're prepared to give something in return. 2. If the delivery driver has red eyes, do not invite them inside your home. 3. Ignore the sounds coming from the freezer. 4. Never ask about the secret ingredient. 5. If your pizza arrives uncut, leave it on your doorstep and do not return home until sunrise. I felt a chill as I read the list. I thought about Emma's warning about weak points between worlds and the rules that guarded them. A young man in a Midnight Mario's uniform stepped outside, looking tired and a bit confused. Exactly how I'd felt on my first night at Sunny Valley. He saw me looking at the sign and smiled nervously. "First day on the job," he explained. "Night shift. They've got some weird rules here, but the pay is good." I opened my mouth to warn him, to tell him everything I knew about strange rules and the dangers they concealed. But would he believe me? Would anyone? Instead, I just nodded and walked away, trying to push away thoughts of what might wait for the young employee when midnight came. I'd escaped my brush with the supernatural, but I couldn't save everyone from making the same mistakes. As I turned the corner, I wondered who would be the first to order the special, or what happened when the delivery driver's eyes turned red. And most of all, I wondered about the new night shift employee who would run into whatever waited inside Midnight Mario's Pizza after dark. My truck's engine ticked as it cooled in the mountain air, the only sound breaking the silence that surrounded the cabin. 6 hours of driving from Denver had brought me here, to this isolated research station that looked more like a forgotten hunting lodge than anything scientific. The job posting had been sparse on details: caretaker duties, weather monitoring equipment, decent pay for the right person willing to work alone. After 3 months of unemployment and watching my savings evaporate, I qualified as desperate enough for just about anything. The cabin sat in a clearing carved from dense pine forest, with jagged peaks rising on all sides like broken teeth. No power lines, no neighbors, just me and whatever wildlife called these mountains home. Perfect. The last thing I needed was people asking questions or offering sympathy about my previous job situation. I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat and walked toward the front door, boots crunching on pine needles and dried leaves. The porch sagged slightly under my weight. and I made a mental note to check the structural integrity before winter set in. Mountain weather could be brutal, and the last thing I wanted was to end up trapped under a collapsed roof. Something white caught my attention as I reached for the door handle. An envelope, wedged tight behind the door frame like someone had shoved it there in a hurry. I worked it loose and turned it over in my hands. No postmark, no address, just my name written in careful block letters across the front. Inside, I found a single sheet of paper covered in the same precise handwriting. The letter started without preamble. James, you need to follow these rules exactly if you want to survive your time here. I know how this sounds, but every word is true. Don't make the same mistakes others have made. Rule 1. If you see a child in the yard, especially a girl in a blue dress, do not approach her. Do not speak to her. Get in your truck and drive away immediately. Don't come back until the next day. Rule 2. Voices will call to you from the forest. They might sound like family members or friends asking for help. Never respond. Never go looking for them. Stay inside and wait for the voices to stop. Rule 3. Never go outside at night unless the porch light is working. If it burns out or won't turn on, stay inside no matter what you hear. Rule 4. Footsteps in the attic always start at 2 a.m. Do not investigate. Do not go up there. The sounds will stop on their own. Rule 5. You'll see a man standing in the trees with red eyes. Don't look directly at him. Don't acknowledge him. Close the curtains and wait for him to leave. These aren't suggestions. Your life depends on following them exactly. Good luck. David. I read through the letter twice, then laughed out loud. The sound carried across the clearing and bounced back from the tree line, startling a few birds into flight. Classic hazing ritual. Every remote job had someone trying to spook the new guy with local legends and ghost stories. David, whoever he was, had put serious effort into this one. The rules were specific enough to seem genuine while being completely ridiculous. A girl in a blue dress, voices from the forest, red-eyed men in trees. It read like a bad horror movie script. I folded the letter and headed inside, leaving the door open behind me to let in fresh air. The cabin's interior was basic but functional. A kitchen with outdated appliances took up one corner, while a stone fireplace dominated the opposite wall. 2 doors led to what I assumed were bedrooms, and a pull-down ladder near the back provided access to the attic. Everything looked clean and well-maintained, which surprised me. Most remote stations I'd worked showed signs of neglect. My equipment cases sat in the truck bed, waiting to be hauled inside. Weather monitoring gear mostly, digital sensors, data loggers, communication equipment to transmit readings back to the main office. The work would be straightforward. Check the instruments twice daily, record environmental data, maintain the equipment, and file reports every week. Easy money for someone who didn't mind isolation. I spent the next hour bringing everything inside and setting up my workspace in the main room. The communication equipment worked perfectly, connecting to the satellite uplink without any issues. The weather sensors would need to be positioned outside tomorrow, but I could handle the initial programming tonight. The letter sat on the kitchen counter where I'd dropped it, catching my eye every time I walked past. David's handwriting looked steady and deliberate, not like someone playing a prank. But then again, commitment to the bit was what made these things work. He'd probably spent weeks crafting the perfect haunted mountain story to mess with whoever replaced him. As the afternoon wore on, I explored the rest of the cabin. The larger bedroom had a decent bed and dresser, while the smaller one was empty except for a desk and chair. Both had windows facing different directions, giving me views of the surrounding forest. The bathroom was tiny but had hot water, which was more than I'd expected at this elevation. The attic ladder creaked when I tested it, but held my weight without issue. I climbed up and poked my head through the opening, using my phone's flashlight to look around. Nothing but empty floorboards and exposed rafters. No mysterious footsteps up there, just dust and spider webs. By evening, I had my equipment running and my gear unpacked. The cabin felt comfortable enough. with good insulation and a solid roof. I built a fire in the stone fireplace and settled into the worn couch with a book, listening to the wind move through the pines outside. David's letter still sat on the counter, visible from where I relaxed. The guy had done his homework on local folklore, I'd give him that. Mountain regions always had stories about strange sightings and unexplained disappearances. Mix in some isolation and imagination, and people could convince themselves of anything. I thought about my mother back in Phoenix, probably watching her evening shows and wondering how I was settling in. She'd worry if she knew how remote this place was, but the distance felt good right now. No one here knew about my previous job, the circumstances that led to my firing, or the months of rejection letters that followed. Just me, the mountains, and equipment that needed babysitting. The fire crackled as logs settled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, night had fallen completely, turning the windows into black mirrors that reflected the warm interior light. I'd need to set up the exterior sensors tomorrow and establish my daily routine. The work would keep me busy enough to avoid overthinking David's elaborate joke. I glanced at the letter one more time, then turned my attention back to my book, dismissing any thoughts about the strange warning. My hiking boots found their rhythm on the mountain trail as I made my way toward the first weather station. The morning air carried the sharp scent of pine resin and damp earth, and I felt more optimistic about this job than I had about anything in months. 2 miles of moderate hiking through familiar terrain, this was exactly the kind of work I could handle. No office politics, no pointless meetings, just me and instruments that needed basic maintenance. The first monitoring station sat in a small clearing about a quarter mile from the cabin. I pulled out my tablet and began recording the overnight readings from the temperature and humidity sensors. Everything looked normal, well within expected ranges for this elevation and season. The solar panels were clean. The data logger showed steady transmission to the main office, and the equipment housing showed no signs of weather damage. I continued deeper into the forest, following GPS coordinates to locate the remaining stations. The work proved straightforward, checking battery levels, clearing debris from instrument housings, recording measurements, and noting any maintenance needs. Each station took about 15 minutes to service properly. The routine felt good after months of uncertainty and rejection letters. I could do this job well, and the isolation meant nobody would be around to judge my previous employment situation. The third station required replacing a temperature probe that had given inconsistent readings for the past week. I'd brought spare parts in my backpack, and the repair took longer than expected. By the time I finished documenting everything and started hiking back toward the cabin, the sun had climbed well above the tree line. My stomach was starting to complain about missing breakfast when the cabin came into view through the trees. I was already thinking about what to make for lunch when I saw her. A small figure stood perfectly still in the front yard, maybe 20 feet from the cabin's porch. A girl, around 7 years old, wearing what looked like a faded blue dress. She faced directly toward me, not moving at all. No fidgeting, no curious head tilts, just complete stillness that seemed wrong for a child her age. My steps slowed as David's letter came rushing back. Rule number 1, a girl in a blue dress. Do not approach her, do not speak to her. Get in your truck and drive away immediately. The memory hit me like cold water. I stopped walking and studied the child more carefully. Her skin looked unnaturally pale, almost gray in the filtered sunlight. And her eyes, they seemed too large for her face, completely black without any visible whites. She didn't blink, didn't move, just watched me with that unnatural stillness. My stomach dropped. This wasn't some neighbor's kid who'd wandered up the mountain. There weren't any neighbors for miles, and no way a 7-year-old could have hiked this far alone. The nearest town was over an hour's drive on winding mountain roads. The girl continued staring at me, and I felt something crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Every instinct told me to call out, ask if she was lost, try to help. But David's words repeated in my head. Your life depends on following them exactly. I took a step backward, then another. The girl didn't react to my movement, didn't track me with her eyes or turn her head. She just kept staring at the spot where I'd been standing, like she was looking through me at something else entirely. My truck sat parked next to the cabin, keys in my pocket. I needed to get there without getting closer to the girl. I continued backing away slowly, then began making a wide circle around the clearing to approach the vehicle from the side. Every few steps, I glanced back at her. She hadn't moved, hadn't even shifted her weight. When I reached the truck, my hands shook as I fumbled for the keys. The girl remained motionless in the yard, still facing the spot where I'd first emerged from the forest. I started the engine and began backing down the dirt access road, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror. The girl grew smaller in the reflection as I gained distance, but she never moved, never turned to watch me leave. Just stood there like a statue in a faded blue dress. I was about a quarter mile down the mountain road when something changed in the mirror. The girl's form seemed to waver, like heat distortion rising from summer pavement. Then she began to stretch upward, her small frame elongating in ways that defied every law of physics. Her arms multiplied, sprouting from her torso in impossible directions. What had been a 7-year-old child twisted into something with too many limbs, all reaching and grasping at empty air. I pressed harder on the accelerator and forced myself to look away from the mirror. When I checked again 30 seconds later, the yard was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated the winding mountain road. Every turn brought the possibility of seeing that thing, whatever it really was, standing in the road ahead. I checked the mirrors obsessively, expecting to see it following me somehow, but the road behind remained empty. The nearest gas station sat at the junction where the mountain road met the main highway, about 20 miles from the cabin. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in my truck for 10 minutes, trying to process what I'd witnessed. The logical part of my mind offered explanations. Altitude sickness, dehydration, stress from the job change. But I'd seen that thing transform with perfect clarity. No hallucination could have been that detailed, that specific. I went inside and bought coffee and a sandwich, then returned to my truck. The idea of driving back up the mountain before dark felt impossible. Whatever that thing was, David's rules existed for a reason. I'd follow them exactly, which meant staying away until the next day. I spent the night in my truck in the gas station parking lot, dozing fitfully between checking the time on my phone. Every noise made me alert. Cars pulling in for fuel, the attendant emptying trash cans, the rumble of passing semis. But nothing approached my vehicle, and nothing resembled a small girl in a blue dress. The sun was well up when I finally drove back to the cabin the next morning. I parked in the same spot and approached the front yard cautiously, scanning for any sign of the girl. The yard looked normal in the bright daylight, just pine needles, scattered leaves, and patches of exposed dirt. But where the girl had stood, deep gouges marked the earth. Not footprints, but long scratches, like something with claws had been scraping at the ground. The marks were fresh, cutting through the surface dirt to expose darker soil underneath. I counted at least 6 different scratch patterns, all concentrated in the exact spot where I'd seen her standing. I walked carefully around the gouges without getting too close. Whatever had made these marks possessed strength beyond what a 7-year-old should have. The scratches were deep enough that I could have laid my finger in them. Back inside the cabin, I went straight to the kitchen counter where I'd left David's letter. I unfolded it and read through every word again, this time paying attention to details I'd dismissed as creative writing. The precise language, the specific warnings, the emphasis on exact compliance. These weren't suggestions based on local folklore. They were survival instructions written by someone who'd encountered these things firsthand and lived to warn others. David hadn't been trying to scare me with elaborate pranks. He'd been trying to keep me alive. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my shirt pocket, close to my chest where I wouldn't forget it was there. Outside, the gouged earth served as physical proof that everything David had written was real. The girl in the blue dress existed, along with whatever supernatural force allowed her to transform into something with claws and too many limbs. 4 more rules remained on David's list. If the first one had been this accurate, the others would be just as real. Voices from the forest that sounded like family members. A man with red eyes standing among the trees. Footsteps in the attic at 2 a.m. I looked up at the ceiling, noting the exact position of the attic access ladder. Tonight, I'd find out how real those footsteps were. The axe bit deep into the pine log, splitting it cleanly down the middle. I'd been working behind the cabin for about an hour, building up my winter firewood supply while the afternoon weather held. The routine felt good. Something normal and productive after yesterday's encounter with whatever that thing in the blue dress had been. My shoulders ached from the repetitive motion, but the physical work helped keep my mind focused on practical matters. The woodpile was getting respectable when I heard my mother's voice calling from the forest. "James? James, honey, are you there?" My axe froze mid-swing. The voice was perfect, her exact tone, the slight rasp she'd developed from years of smoking, even the way she drew out the second syllable of my name when she was worried. But my mother lived 800 miles away in Phoenix, probably getting ready for her afternoon game shows about now. "James, please, I'm lost. I need you to help me find my way back." The voice came from deeper in the trees, maybe 100 yards into the forest. My hands tightened on the axe handle as David's rules came flooding back. Rule number 2, voices will call to you from the forest. They might sound like family members or friends asking for help. Never respond, never go looking for them. "James, I can hear you out there. Why won't you answer me? I'm scared." Every instinct I had screamed at me to call back, to drop the axe and run toward that voice. My mother had never been to Colorado, had no way of reaching this place, but the desperation in her tone sounded completely real. She was pleading now, her voice breaking like she was crying. "Please, honey, it's getting dark and I can't find the path. I just need you to call out so I can follow your voice." I forced myself to lower the axe and walk slowly toward the cabin's back door. My legs felt unsteady, like I was fighting against my own body's desire to rush into the forest. The voice followed me, growing more frantic. "James, don't leave me out here alone." I reached the door and fumbled with the handle, my hands shaking badly enough that it took 3 tries to turn it. Once inside, I threw the deadbolt and pressed my back against the door. The voice continued calling, moving around the cabin now like someone circling the building. "I know you're in there. Why are you hiding from me? I raised you better than this." That last part hit hard. The disappointment in her tone, the guilt trip phrasing. It was exactly what my mother would say if I actually ignored her cries for help. But I knew she was safe in her Phoenix apartment, probably making herself a sandwich and getting ready to watch her stories on television. I moved to the kitchen counter where my equipment tablet was charging and tried to focus on recording the afternoon's weather readings. My fingers kept slipping on the screen as I entered numbers, and I had to delete and retype the temperature data twice. The voice outside grew more desperate. "James, something's following me. I can hear it in the bushes. Please help me." I gripped the tablet tighter and forced myself to concentrate on the humidity measurements. Numbers, facts, data that made sense and followed logical patterns. The voice was not my mother. My mother was safe in Arizona, not wandering around a Colorado mountain forest. "Fine. If you won't help me, I'll find my own way. But don't come crying to me when you need something." The last comment was delivered in my mother's exact angry tone, the same one she'd used when I was 12 and refused to help her carry groceries. Whoever or whatever was out there had studied her, learned her speech patterns, her emotional triggers. But it wasn't her. I watched the clock on the tablet as the voice continued for another 15 minutes, alternating between pleas for help and accusations about my selfishness. Then, abruptly, it stopped. the forest went quiet, except for the normal sounds of wind moving through pine branches. I waited another hour before unlocking the door and checking outside. The woodpile sat where I'd left it, split logs scattered around the chopping block. My axe lay in the dirt where I'd dropped it. No footprints marked the soft earth around the cabin, no signs that anyone had actually been circling the building. But I could still hear that perfect reproduction of my mother's voice echoing in my head. The rest of the day passed normally. I finished my equipment checks, made dinner, and built a fire in the fireplace as evening settled over the mountains. I tried calling my mother around 8 o'clock, using the satellite phone to reach her landline in Phoenix. "Hello, honey." Her voice sounded exactly like the one from the forest, which made my stomach twist. "How's the new job going?" "It's good, Mom. Quiet, just wanted to check in." "That's sweet of you. I was just thinking about you today. Had this weird feeling like you might be in some kind of trouble." I nearly dropped the phone. "What kind of feeling?" "Oh, you know how mothers worry. Probably nothing. Just seemed like you might need help with something." We talked for another 10 minutes about her neighbors and the Phoenix weather, but her earlier comments stuck with me long after I hung up. Some kind of connection had existed between the voice in the forest and my actual mother, like whatever was out there had been tugging on the emotional bond between us. I went to bed around 11, but sleep took a long time to come. Every small sound from outside made me alert. Branches creaking, wind patterns changing, the distant call of an owl. When I finally dozed off, I kept one ear open for any voices that might start calling again. At exactly 2 a.m, heavy footsteps began pacing back and forth in the attic directly above my bedroom. I jolted awake as the first footfall echoed through the ceiling. The steps were deliberate and rhythmic, like someone searching methodically through the space above me. Not random creaks or settling noises, but the unmistakable sound of weight moving across floorboards. Another step, then another. The pattern repeated every few seconds as whatever was up there walked from one end of the attic to the other. I lay frozen in bed, counting each footfall and watching tiny particles of dust drift down from the ceiling in the moonlight streaming through my bedroom window. Rule number 4 echoed in my memory. Footsteps in the attic always start at 2 a.m. Do not investigate. Do not go up there. The sounds will stop on their own. The steps continued their steady pattern for what felt like hours. I checked my phone repeatedly, 2:15, 2:22, 2:38. The sound never varied in rhythm or intensity. Just that same deliberate pacing, like someone looking for something specific and checking every corner of the attic space. More dust filtered down as the footsteps passed directly overhead. I found myself holding my breath during each pass, then exhaling slowly when the sounds moved to the far end of the attic. The temptation to grab a flashlight and climb up there was overwhelming. Whatever was making those sounds was in my space, in my cabin, and every instinct told me to confront it. But David's rules had been right about the girl in the blue dress and the voices in the forest. If he said not to investigate the attic, then I'd stay exactly where I was. By 2:45, the steady rhythm was making me feel hypnotized. The same pattern, over and over, with dust motes dancing in the moonbeams each time the footsteps passed overhead. I started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps across, then a pause, then the return journey. 15 seconds each way. At exactly 3 a.m, the footsteps stopped. The silence felt heavier than the noise had been. I waited another hour before relaxing enough to close my eyes again, and when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed about my mother calling for help while something with too many feet paced endlessly through empty rooms above her head. The next evening, I was reading by the living room window when a movement in the trees caught my attention. I looked up from my book to see a tall figure standing among the pine trees about 50 yards away from the cabin. The man was motionless, just like the girl had been, but where she'd been small and pale, This figure towered above the surrounding undergrowth, and his eyes, 2 points of red light that cut through the evening darkness like searchlights, fixed directly on my window. I immediately looked down at my book, remembering rule number 5. Don't look directly at him. Don't acknowledge him. Close the curtains and wait for him to leave. My hands shook as I stood up and walked to the window. The red glow was visible in my peripheral vision, those twin points of light tracking my movement. I grabbed the curtain edge and pulled it closed, blocking my view of the forest completely. Then I sat back down and tried to continue reading, though the words blurred together on the page. The book was about weather patterns in mountain regions, technical and boring enough that I'd hoped it would help me relax. Instead, I kept reading the same paragraph over and over while my mind focused on what was standing outside. Minutes crawled by. I checked my phone obsessively. 7:30, 7:45, 8:10. The curtain remained closed, but I could feel those red eyes out there, watching the cabin, waiting for me to look back, to make eye contact, to acknowledge what I'd seen. At 8:20, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A low sound, almost below the range of human hearing, like a massive engine idling in the distance. It seemed to come from the direction where the figure was standing, a deep rumble that I felt more than heard. The sound continued for several minutes, then faded away. I forced myself to wait another hour before checking the window again. When I finally pulled back the curtain, the forest looked empty. No tall figure, no red eyes cutting through the darkness. But something was wrong with the trees where he'd been standing. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the front porch, shining the beam toward the spot where I'd seen the figure. A cluster of pine trees that had been green and healthy yesterday now stood completely dead. Their needles had turned brown and fallen away, leaving bare branches that looked like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. The bark had turned black and cracked, as if something had sucked all the life out of them in a matter of hours. I kept the flashlight beam moving, not wanting to focus on any one spot too long in case those red eyes were still out there somewhere. But the dead trees were unmistakable. 5 mature pines that had been killed by whatever force that figure carried with him. Back inside, I made sure all the curtains were closed and every door was locked. 3 of David's 5 rules had now proven themselves real. The girl in the blue dress, the voices from the forest that sounded like people I knew, the footsteps in the attic at exactly 2 a.m, the red-eyed man standing among the trees. Only Rule 3 remained untested. Never go outside at night unless the porch light was working. I walked to the front door and flipped the switch, watching the porch light illuminate the wooden boards outside. It worked fine, casting a warm yellow glow across the front yard. But looking at those dead trees in the distance, I had no intention of testing whether the light would keep working when I needed it most. I was making my rounds to check the evening equipment readings when I heard the generator coughing behind the cabin. The sound wasn't right, a stuttering rhythm that meant fuel flow problems or worse. I'd been putting off a thorough inspection for 2 days, but the equipment couldn't afford to lose power overnight. The porch light cast its familiar yellow glow across the front yard as I walked around to the generator housing. I'd grown to appreciate that light more than I'd ever thought possible. Such a simple thing, but after seeing what David's rules protected against, I checked it obsessively every evening. I was pulling off the generator's access panel when the light clicked off behind me. The darkness hit like a physical weight. No moon tonight, just thick clouds that blocked even the faintest starlight. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight and illuminated the generator's interior, but my hands were already shaking. Rule 3 echoed in my head with perfect clarity. Never go outside at night unless the porch light is working. If it burns out or won't turn on, stay inside no matter what you hear. But the generator was on its last legs. The fuel filter looked clogged, and the carburetor was making grinding noises that meant serious internal problems. If this thing died completely, I'd lose all my monitoring equipment. The satellite uplink, the data transmission, everything that connected me to the outside world would go dark. I walked quickly to the front door and tested the porch light switch. Nothing. I tried it several more times, but the bulbs stayed dark. The generator was still running, so the electrical problem was isolated to the light circuit. Probably a blown bulb or loose connection. My equipment cases sat inside the cabin, including spare bulbs and basic electrical tools. I could replace the bulb and restore the light in 5 minutes. But that meant going back outside afterward to finish the generator repairs, and by then it might be too late. The engine was making worse noises with each passing minute. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, weighing my options. David's rules had saved my life 3 times already, but they'd been written by someone who didn't depend on this equipment for his livelihood. If the generator died, I'd lose my job and end up back where I started, unemployed and running out of savings. The carburetor made a particularly awful grinding sound, and I made my decision. I grabbed my phone for light and headed back to the generator housing. 5 more minutes of work, then straight inside. The porch light could wait until morning. I'd barely started loosening the fuel filter when the whispers began. They came from every direction at once. Dozens of voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Not English, not Spanish, not anything that sounded remotely familiar. The words had a flowing musical quality that would have been beautiful under different circumstances, but hearing them emerge from the pitch-black forest made my skin crawl. I kept working on the fuel filter, trying to ignore the sounds. My phone's flashlight created a small bubble of visibility around the generator. But beyond that circle lay complete darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, like a crowd of people having urgent conversations just outside my range of vision. Something moved between the trees to my left. I caught the motion in my peripheral vision. A shadow sliding from one trunk to another in a way that didn't match the wind patterns. There was no wind tonight anyway. The air sat perfectly still, which made the whispering voices even more unnatural. More movement this time to my right, then directly behind me. The shadows were circling the cabin, keeping just beyond the reach of my phone's light. But they moved wrong, flowing like liquid rather than following the solid shapes of anything real. The fuel filter finally came loose, and I examined it in the phone's glow, completely clogged with debris and old gasoline residue. I'd brought a spare in my equipment case, but it was inside the cabin. The generator couldn't run much longer with this level of blockage. The whispers suddenly stopped, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the noise had been. I lifted my head from the generator and listened carefully. Nothing. No wind in the trees, no distant traffic sounds, no normal nighttime forest noises. Just my own breathing and the generator's labored coughing. Then I heard footsteps circling the cabin. Heavy, deliberate steps that moved steadily through the pine needles and fallen leaves. Whatever was making them was large, much bigger than the girl in the blue dress. The footsteps maintained a constant distance from the building, like something was pacing around the perimeter while staying just outside the reach of any light. I abandoned the generator and stood up slowly, keeping my phone's flashlight pointed at the ground. The footsteps continued their circuit, and I could track the position by sound alone. Behind the cabin now, moving toward the front, passing the front yard, heading around to the other side. When the footsteps reached the point directly opposite from where I stood, I bolted for the front door. My feet pounded across the wooden porch boards as the footsteps changed direction to follow me. Whatever was out there was fast. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, no longer bothering with stealth. I grabbed the door handle and turned it, but the door barely budged. Something was pushing against it from outside. I threw my full weight against the door, my shoulder driving into the wooden surface. The pressure from outside was incredible, like trying to hold back a linebacker. But there was nothing visible on the other side of the door's small window, just darkness pressing against the glass. I braced my feet against the porch boards and used every muscle I had to force the door closed. The invisible resistance fought back, and for several terrifying seconds I thought I was going to lose. Then, abruptly, the pressure vanished. The door slammed shut so hard, that the impact rattled the windows. I threw the deadbolt and backed away from the door, my chest heaving. Whatever had been out there was gone, but I could still feel its presence lingering like a bad smell. I checked every window to make sure the curtains were closed, then sat down at the kitchen table to wait for morning. The generator coughed twice more and died around midnight, taking all my equipment with it. I woke up to brilliant sunshine streaming through gaps in the bedroom curtains. My first thought was checking the front door for damage. I'd heard stories about bears trying to break into mountain cabins, though that wouldn't explain the shadows or whispers. The door's exterior told a different story entirely. 4 parallel gouges ran from the top of the doorframe nearly to the bottom, each one deep enough to expose the raw wood beneath the paint. The marks looked like claw marks, but they were enormous, at least 3 feet long and spaced too wide apart for any animal I could identify. Whatever had made them possessed strength beyond anything natural. The scratches had carved completely through the paint and well into the wood itself. I walked around to check the generator housing. The access panel lay on the ground where I'd dropped it, and the fuel filter sat next to the engine. But the generator itself was completely destroyed. The engine block had been cracked open like an eggshell, and every component inside was twisted into unrecognizable metal fragments. It looked like something had taken a sledgehammer to every piece of machinery. No repair was possible. I needed a completely new generator, plus replacement parts for any monitoring equipment that had been damaged by the power loss. The nearest place that might have what I needed was the hardware store in town, about 20 miles down the mountain road. I spent an hour documenting the equipment damage and calculating what I'd need to buy. The satellite uplink had backup batteries that would last another day or two, but everything else was dead until I restored power. I made a list of parts and tools, grabbed my wallet, and headed for the truck. The drive to town felt like emerging from a nightmare into normal reality. Traffic lights, street signs, people walking dogs and washing cars in their driveways. I'd only been on the mountain for 4 days, but the ordinary suburban world already felt foreign after what I'd experienced. The hardware store had most of what I needed, though the generator was expensive enough to make me wince. The clerk was friendly and helpful, asking about my project and offering advice on installation. I didn't mention the supernatural claw marks or shadow creatures that had destroyed the original equipment. Just a routine replacement for a worn-out generator at a remote work site. I loaded everything into the truck and stopped for lunch at a diner before heading back up the mountain. The normalcy felt therapeutic. Other customers chatting about local news. The waitress refilling coffee cups, the smell of bacon and fresh bread. Part of me wanted to stay in town, get a motel room, and pretend the mountain cabin didn't exist. But I had a job to finish and equipment to protect. David's rules would keep me safe as long as I followed them exactly. Last night had been a test of my resolve, and I'd almost failed by staying outside after the porch light died. Tonight I'd be more careful. The sun was setting by the time I reached the cabin with my new equipment. I parked next to the front porch and started unloading the generator, planning to set it up in the morning when I had better light. Everything looked normal in the fading daylight. No signs of the previous night's supernatural activity. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, then froze completely. Words covered the kitchen wall in dark red lettering, written in the same block print as David's original letter. But these weren't David's rules. Someone or something had rewritten all 5 rules in what looked like dried blood. Rule 1. Go outside when you see the child. Follow her into the forest. Rule 2. Answer the voices when they call. They have important messages for you. Rule 3. Always go outside at night, especially when the lights fail. Rule 4. Investigate the attic immediately when you hear footsteps. Do not wait. Rule 5. Look directly at the red-eyed man. Make eye contact and acknowledge his presence. Every rule was the exact opposite of David's original warnings. Instead of protecting me, these new rules would guarantee my death. I pulled David's letter from my shirt pocket and compared the handwriting. The style was similar, but the blood-red lettering had an unnatural quality that made my eyes water when I looked at it directly. Something was trying to trick me into breaking the real rules. The entities had figured out that I was following David's instructions, and now they were attempting to manipulate me into destroying my own protection. I dragged the kitchen table against the wall to cover the bloody writing, then moved a bookshelf in front of that for good measure. I couldn't stand to look at those false rules any longer. The real rules were safely memorized and written in David's letter. These new ones were lies, designed to get me killed. By the time I finished barricading the kitchen wall, full darkness had settled over the mountain. I checked that the porch light was working. It was. Then locked every door and window before retreating to the bedroom. I moved the dresser in front of the bedroom door and built a makeshift barricade using the desk chair and some equipment cases. At exactly 2 a.m, the footsteps in the attic began, but tonight they were different. Instead of the steady, measured pacing I'd grown accustomed to, these footsteps were frantic and aggressive. Something was running back and forth across the attic floor, then jumping up and down with enough force to shake dust from the ceiling. Objects crashed and tumbled overhead like furniture was being thrown around. The false rules on the kitchen wall had said to investigate the attic immediately. Don't wait. But David's real rule was clear. Never go up there, no matter what I heard. The sounds would stop on their own. Except they weren't stopping. If anything, they were getting louder and more violent. Something heavy slammed into the attic floor directly above my bed, hard enough to crack the ceiling plaster. Pieces of paint and drywall rained down on my blankets. More crashes followed, each one louder than the last. It sounded like a demolition crew was working in the attic, systematically destroying everything up there. The ceiling fixture swayed with each impact, and hairline cracks spread across the plaster like spider webs. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to block out the noise, but the attacks continued for hours. Whatever was in the attic was running out of patience, and the peaceful footsteps of previous nights had turned into an all-out assault on the cabin's structure. When morning finally came, the ceiling above my bed looked like it might collapse at any moment. I spent the day moving my most essential equipment to the truck and working on temporary ceiling supports using lumber from my supplies. The damage from the previous night's attic assault looked worse in daylight, long cracks spreading across the plaster like fractured ice, chunks of drywall hanging loose, and the ceiling fixture barely holding on by its electrical wires. Whatever was up there had been trying to break through, and I doubted the structure would survive another night of that violence. The 5th night arrived with an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. No wind stirred the pine branches. No normal forest sounds echoed from the darkness. Even the usual creaking of the cabin's wooden frame had gone silent, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I was checking the porch light for the 3rd time when I saw her standing in the yard. The girl in the blue dress had returned, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely visible between the trees, the red-eyed man's tall silhouette watched from the forest edge. His crimson gaze cut through the darkness like twin laser beams, fixed on the cabin windows. The child remained motionless in her usual spot, but something was different about her stance tonight. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her 2 large black eyes reflected the porch light with an oily sheen. I backed away from the window and closed the curtains, my hands shaking as I secured the fabric. Rule 1 and Rule 5 were being tested simultaneously. Don't look at the child. Don't acknowledge the red-eyed man. But having both entities present felt like a coordinated attack rather than random supernatural activity. The voices started before I could retreat to the bedroom. "James, we need your help." My father's voice called from the forest, even though he'd been dead for 5 years. "Your mother is trapped up here in the mountains. She's hurt and can't walk. Son, please come find us." That was my grandfather's voice, dead for 15 years, but speaking with the same gentle authority I remembered from childhood. "We've been waiting for you to help us get home." More voices joined in. My Aunt Sarah, my high school friend Mike, my college roommate Danny. All of them calling my name, all of them claiming to be lost or injured and needing my assistance. The voices came from every direction around the cabin, creating a chorus of familiar people who should have been impossible to hear. I pressed my back against the kitchen wall and tried to block out the sound, but the voices grew more insistent. They were saying things only the real people would have known. Childhood memories, private conversations, inside jokes that no supernatural entity should have been able to access. Yet I knew they were all lies designed to make me break Rule 2. Above my head, the attic exploded into violence. The attic access door began rattling. The wooden panel in the hallway ceiling shook violently in its frame, like something was trying to push it open from above. The metal hinges groaned under the strain, and dust cascaded down with each impact. Whatever was up there had abandoned any pretense of stealth and was now actively trying to break through into the main cabin. The voices outside grew more frantic. The child remained motionless in the yard. The red-eyed man's gaze burned through the curtains, and the attic access door rattled harder with each passing second. All 5 supernatural forces were working together in a coordinated assault designed to terrorize me into breaking the rules. The access door's hinges snapped. The wooden panel crashed to the hallway floor, and the pull-down ladder unfolded with a metallic screech. Darkness yawned above the opening like an open mouth. But I could hear movement up there. Something large, shifting around among whatever David and the other caretakers had left behind. I had 2 choices. Wait for whatever was in the attic to come down and confront me in the cabin, or take control of the situation and go up there myself. Neither option followed David's rules, but the rules assumed the entities would maintain their usual patterns. Tonight was different. Tonight they were breaking their own established behaviors to force a confrontation. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the ladder. The rungs creaked under my weight as I climbed into the attic space. My flashlight beam swept across the area, revealing something I hadn't expected. The space was filled with belongings from previous caretakers. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. Plastic storage containers sat stacked in corners, and personal items were scattered across the floor like someone had been searching through them. I moved deeper into the attic, stepping carefully around the debris. Most of the boxes contained clothes and books, but others held more interesting items. Photo albums showing different people at the cabin over the years, personal journals bound in worn leather, equipment manuals for weather monitoring gear that looked decades old. I opened the nearest journal and found entries dated from 1987. The handwriting belonged to someone named Robert Chen, who documented the same supernatural encounters I'd been experiencing. The girl in the blue dress. Voices calling from the forest. Footsteps in the attic at 2 a.m. The red-eyed man standing among the trees. Another journal from 1994 belonged to Sarah Martinez. Her entries described identical experiences with slightly different variations. The voices had sometimes sounded like her sister instead of her mother, and the attic footsteps had been accompanied by scratching sounds. But the basic pattern was the same, right down to the specific times and locations. I found journals from 2001, 2008, 2015, and several other years. Each caretaker had faced the same supernatural forces, and each had documented their experiences in careful detail. But something was wrong with the timeline. Some journals ended abruptly mid-entry, others had final pages that had been torn out, and a few showed signs of water damage or fire. The most recent journal was different from the others. The handwriting was familiar, the same block letters as the warning letter I'd been carrying in my shirt pocket. This was David's journal, and it contained information the others didn't have. I opened to the final entry, dated just 3 months ago, day 28. I figured out what they are and why they're trapped here. Some kind of accident or ritual went wrong decades ago, binding them to this specific location. They can't leave the mountain on their own, but they can possess anyone who breaks the rules. Once they have a human host, they can use that person's body to escape. I've been talking to them through the attic access. They're getting desperate. Each caretaker who follows the rules completely stays safe. But anyone who breaks even one rule disappears forever. I think they're using the missing people's bodies to try different escape methods. The entities keep offering deals. They promise to let me live if I help them leave the mountain. But I've seen what happened to the others who agreed. Their bodies become empty shells while something else moves around inside. I'm leaving tonight. I've written instructions for the next caretaker, but I doubt they'll listen. No one ever believes the warnings until it's too late. If whoever finds this journal is smart, they'll burn this place down and walk away. Don't try to help the entities. Don't try to understand them. Just run. Laughter echoed from below me. A child's giggle drifted up through the attic access opening, clear and musical and completely wrong. The girl had gotten inside the cabin while I was reading David's journal. She was directly below me now, standing in the hallway where the ladder led down. I crept to the access opening and peered down carefully. The hallway looked empty, but the laughter continued. Closer now, like she was moving through the cabin's main room. I could hear her bare feet patting against the wooden floor as she explored the space I'd thought was secure. More sounds joined hers. Heavy footsteps that belonged to something much larger than a 7-year-old girl. The red-eyed man had entered the cabin as well, and the voices from outside were growing louder as additional entities gathered around the building. I had to get down there. Whatever was happening in my cabin, I couldn't face it from the attic. I stuffed David's journal into my jacket pocket and moved toward the ladder, but stopped when I heard my mother's voice speaking directly below the opening. "James, honey, we've been waiting for you to join us." I looked down and saw them all gathered in the hallway. The girl in the blue dress stood directly beneath the ladder, her pale face turned upward toward me. Her black eyes reflected my flashlight beam like mirrors, and her smile showed too many teeth arranged in rows like a shark's mouth. Behind her, the red-eyed man's tall form filled the narrow hallway. His eyes blazed with that familiar crimson light, but now I could see his face clearly. The features were human but wrong, as if someone had tried to build a person from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. His mouth was too wide, his nose too narrow, and his skin had the waxy texture of something that had never been truly alive. Shadowy figures pressed against the walls, vague human shapes that represented the voices I'd been hearing. They shifted and flowed like smoke, but I could make out familiar facial features in their dark forms. My father's jawline, my grandfather's gentle eyes, my Aunt Sarah's curly hair. They were wearing the faces of my dead relatives like masks. "Come down, James." The girl's voice was sweet and innocent, but it came from that mouth full of predator teeth. "We want to make you an offer." "We can help each other," the red-eyed man said. His voice was deep and resonant, like sound echoing from the bottom of a well. "You help us leave this mountain, and we let you walk away unharmed. All you have to do is break one little rule," added the shadow wearing my father's face. "Just one. Step outside without the porch light working. Acknowledge our presence. Follow the child into the forest. It's so simple." "We've been trapped here for so long," whispered the girl. "We just want to go home. Don't you want to go home too?" They waited for my response, all of them looking up at me with eyes that weren't quite human. The offer was tempting in its simplicity. Help them escape and they'd leave me alone. But David's journal had made it clear what would happen to anyone who agreed to their deal. "No," I said. "I'm not helping you." The girl's smile vanished instantly. Her face twisted with rage, and when she opened her mouth, a sound like breaking glass emerged. The red-eyed man's eyes blazed brighter, and the shadow figures began moving faster, their forms becoming more solid and defined. "Wrong answer," the girl hissed. They attacked all at once. The girl launched herself at the ladder with inhuman speed, her small hands grabbing the rungs and pulling her upward like a spider. The red-eyed man reached up with arms that stretched impossibly long. his fingers extending toward my feet. The shadow figures flowed up the walls and across the ceiling, reaching for me from every direction. But something was wrong with their attack. As soon as they got close to me, they slowed down, as if they were moving through thick liquid. The girl's clawed hands stopped just inches from my legs, straining against some invisible barrier. The red-eyed man's extended arms couldn't quite reach the attic opening. The shadow figures pressed against the edge of the access but couldn't pass through. David's rules had protected me somehow. Following them exactly had created some kind of shield that the entities couldn't break through. They could threaten and cajole and try to trick me into breaking the rules myself, but they couldn't force me to violate them. The girl screamed with frustration and dropped back to the hallway floor. The red-eyed man's eyes flared with such intensity that I had to shield my face from the light. The shadow figures writhed and twisted, their forms becoming more chaotic as their rage grew. Then the cabin began to burn. It wasn't normal fire. Flames the color of fresh blood erupted from the walls and floor, spreading with supernatural speed through the building's wooden frame. The fire gave off no heat, but it consumed everything it touched, turning solid matter into ash within seconds. I scrambled back from the access opening as flames shot up through the ladder. The attic floor beneath my feet began smoldering, and I could smell the acrid scent of burning wood mixed with something else, something organic and foul that made my stomach turn. The entity's screams echoed from below as the supernatural fire spread through the cabin. They weren't trying to escape. They were feeding the flames, using their rage and frustration to fuel the destruction. If they couldn't possess me, they'd burn down everything around me and trap me in the inferno. I crawled to the far end of the attic where a small ventilation grate provided access to the outside. The metal was hot to the touch, but I kicked it out and squeezed through the opening onto the cabin's roof. The entire structure was now engulfed in those strange red flames that consumed without heat. I slid down the roof slope and dropped to the ground near my truck. The keys were in my pocket. The engine started immediately, and I reversed down the dirt access road as fast as I dared in the darkness. In my rearview mirror, the cabin looked like a torch against the night sky, but the fire wasn't spreading to the surrounding forest. It was contained somehow, burning only what the entities wanted destroyed. By the time I reached the main road, the flames had consumed everything. The cabin, the generator housing, even the weather monitoring equipment. All of it reduced to ash and twisted metal. But the trees around the clearing remained untouched, and I knew the entities were still there, still trapped, still waiting for the next caretaker who might be foolish enough to break David's rules. The drive to Boulder took 4 hours through winding mountain roads, and I made it without stopping once. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had gone white, and every few minutes I checked the rearview mirror expecting to see red flames or glowing eyes following me down the highway. But there was nothing behind me except empty asphalt and darkness. The Forest Service office didn't open until 8 in the morning, so I sat in their parking lot and watched the sun rise over the city. Normal people were starting their normal days, commuting to work, walking dogs, buying coffee. I'd forgotten what ordinary life looked like after 5 nights of supernatural terror. When the receptionist arrived, I was waiting by the front door with my story prepared. Gas leak in the cabin's propane system. Explosion around midnight. I'd barely escaped with my equipment and truck. The whole structure was gone, along with all the weather monitoring gear. The duty officer, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Wong, listened to my report with increasing skepticism. She pulled up satellite images on her computer and confirmed that something had indeed burned at the coordinates I'd provided. The clearing showed a blackened area where the cabin had stood, but the surrounding forest remained untouched. "That's unusual for a gas explosion," she said, studying the images. "Usually we see more collateral damage to nearby vegetation." "Maybe the tank was smaller than I thought," I said. "I'm not an expert on propane systems." She asked for more details about the explosion, what I'd been doing when it happened. whether I'd smelled gas beforehand, if I'd heard any warning sounds. I stuck to my story about being outside working on the generator when the blast occurred. The lies came easily after what I'd actually experienced. Patricia filed an incident report and assured me that a team would investigate the site within the next few days. She also mentioned that I'd be compensated for the lost equipment, though there would be an investigation into the cause of the explosion. I signed several forms and left my contact information, then drove back to my apartment in Denver. For the first time in a week, I slept through the night without listening for footsteps or voices. Over the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about what David's journal had revealed. The entities had been trapped on that mountain for decades, and the Forest Service had been unknowingly feeding them a steady supply of potential victims. Every few years, someone would take the caretaker job and either follow the rules to survive or break them and disappear completely. I started researching the mountain's history using online databases and newspaper archives. What I found made my stomach turn. The disappearances went back to 1947, when the first weather monitoring station had been established. A Forest Service employee named Thomas Mitchell had vanished after 3 weeks on the job, leaving behind no trace except his abandoned truck. The official report blamed a hiking accident, though no body was ever recovered. Similar incidents occurred every few years after that. Robert Chen in 1987, the same name I'd seen in one of the attic journals. Sarah Martinez in 1994. At least 12 other people over the decades, all taking jobs as caretakers or researchers at that specific location, all vanishing without explanation. The pattern was always the same. Someone would take the isolated position, work alone for a few weeks, then disappear entirely. Their vehicles would be found parked near the cabin, personal belongings left behind, no signs of struggle or foul play. The Forest Service would conduct searches, file reports, and eventually hire replacements. What bothered me most was how readily they kept filling the position. After so many disappearances, any reasonable organization should have questioned whether the location was safe for solo workers. But the job postings continued appearing regularly, always emphasizing the isolation and independence that would appeal to people like me, unemployed, desperate, willing to work anywhere for decent pay. I wondered if the entities somehow influenced the hiring process, drawing in exactly the type of people who would be most vulnerable to their manipulations. I spent hours online tracking down contact information for the families of missing caretakers. Most of them had given up hope years ago, but they were willing to talk about their lost relatives. What I learned confirmed my worst suspicions. 3 of the families mentioned that their missing person had received written warnings before starting the job. Robert Chen's sister still had copies of rules her brother had shown her, though she'd dismissed them as pranks at the time. The rules were nearly identical to David's letter, with the same 5 warnings about the girl in the blue dress, voices from the forest, staying inside at night, avoiding the attic footsteps, and not acknowledging the red-eyed man. Sarah Martinez's mother remembered her daughter mentioning weird instructions left by the previous caretaker. Sarah had thought they were ridiculous and had thrown them away immediately. She'd lasted 6 days before disappearing. The families who'd never heard about any rules had lost their relatives within the first week of employment. Those who'd received warnings but ignored them had disappeared after 2 or 3 weeks. Only David had survived long enough to escape, and he'd done it by following every rule exactly until he could get away. I was supposed to be next in that cycle. If I hadn't found David's letter, or if I'd dismissed it as a joke like Sarah Martinez had done, I would have been dead within days. The entities had been waiting patiently for me to break just one rule, so they could use my body to escape their mountain prison. A week after my visit to the Forest Service office, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Harrison? This is Patricia Wong from the Boulder Forest Service. I have a job opportunity that might interest you." The position was at a remote weather station in the Montana wilderness. More isolated than the previous location, better pay, and they needed someone immediately. The previous caretaker had left unexpectedly, and they were behind on data collection. "I understand if you're hesitant after what happened in Colorado," Patricia said. "But this is a different situation entirely. Modern facilities, better communication equipment, and the area has an excellent safety record." I listened to her pitch while staring at David's letter, which I'd taped to my refrigerator as a constant reminder. The entities from my mountain were trapped there, permanently. But what if other locations had similar problems? What if the Forest Service was unknowingly managing multiple supernatural sites, feeding victims to things that had been contained for decades? "Thank you for thinking of me," I said, "but I'm not interested in remote work anymore." Patricia seemed surprised by my refusal. She offered to increase the salary, mentioned excellent benefits, and emphasized how rare it was to find such isolated positions. The more she pushed, the more convinced I became that this wasn't a normal job offer. "I've taken a position in Denver," I told her, "something more permanent." The next morning, I applied for a job at Morrison Hardware, a family-owned store that had been operating since the 1960s. The work was simple, helping customers find tools and supplies, operating the cash register, stocking shelves. The pay was significantly less than what the Forest Service had offered, but the store was located in the middle of town with plenty of foot traffic and normal human interactions. The owner, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, hired me on the spot after I demonstrated my knowledge of weather monitoring equipment and outdoor gear. I didn't mention my recent experiences in the mountains, just that I'd decided to leave field research for more stable employment. Working at the hardware store felt like a return to sanity. Customers came in with practical problems, leaky faucets, squeaky hinges, gardens that needed fertilizer. These were issues that could be solved with the right tools and a little knowledge. No supernatural rules, no entities trying to possess human hosts, no voices calling from dark forests. But I couldn't forget what I'd learned about the pattern of disappearances. David had escaped and tried to warn future caretakers by leaving his letter, but one warning wasn't enough. People would keep taking those jobs, and some would ignore the rules or never receive them at all. I made photocopies of David's original letter and researched how to distribute warnings more effectively. Anonymous emails to hiking forums, posts on websites dedicated to Forest Service employment, comments on job boards where similar positions might be advertised. I couldn't prevent people from taking dangerous jobs, but I could make sure the information was available for anyone willing to look for it. Late at night, when the hardware store was closed and I was alone in my apartment, I sometimes thought about those entities still trapped on their mountain. The girl in the blue dress standing motionless in empty clearings, the red-eyed man watching from between dead trees, the voices calling to no one, offering false comfort and deadly lies. They were still there, still waiting. Sooner or later, someone would take that caretaker position. Maybe they'd receive David's warnings and follow them carefully like I had. Maybe they'd dismiss them as pranks and break the rules within days. Or maybe they'd never get any warnings at all, and the entities would have a fresh victim to work with. The Forest Service would hire replacements until they found someone desperate enough or foolish enough to ignore the signs. The cycle would begin again, and those things would keep trying to escape their prison, one human host at a time. I kept David's letter in my wallet as a reminder that some jobs aren't worth taking, no matter how good they look on paper. The mountains were full of beautiful, isolated places that seemed perfect for starting over, but some of them were hiding things that should never be set free.